Hello and welcome to another episode of the Zee Zed Show. I'm Zee.
And I am Zed.
And today we're going to be talking about first layers on your printer, why they're important, and how to potentially improve them.
When I first started 3D printing, I was using a Focus, and that is manual bed leveling.
I was
And I
using an
always
Ender 3
wondered, and I
manual
always
bed
wondered why
leveling.
I was having, I had so many problems getting good prints. You should see the monstrosities that I created, and the disasters, and the warping, and all these sorts of things. Even with manual bed leveling, you can get a good first layer. It just takes some work for sure. So,
Yes.
if your bed's not level, your filament's not going to adhere properly. You'll have an uneven print surface. Of course, poor layer adhesion,
But
and
before we get into any of that,
yeah, all that's
I want
kind
to
of
talk about what we've been making this week. Talk about something a little bit exciting.
okay. Well, I am working on what I'm going to be bringing to Murph. So we are both going to be attending the Midwest Rep Rot Festival, which is in Goshen, Indiana, June 23rd to 25th, I believe, something like
Yeah.
that,
Make
somewhere
sure to
around
sign up
there.
now if you're interested.
Yeah. Um, it's a free for all too, so just show
Yeah.
up.
Show
But
up.
we are both representing Polymaker and Zee Zed and MakerDeck and whatever else. But I am going to be bringing Retro Makers concentric circle coasters. So I have started printing a few. So that's what I'm
Just a
doing.
few.
This does require a nice level bed to get a nice clean print, but just a few.
Yeah, those look really good. The first layers look pretty awesome. And those are all color changed or
Yeah, one color change.
one color swap?
Yeah,
Cool.
one color swap.
Very, very beautiful. I love it.
All right.
Well,
And
I've
you
been
have been
working
working on.
on, well, mainly a printer. So I've been working on the board and getting that both printed and built. But I decided to print this. This is 3D Print Bunny's. It's called Just Balloons model. So it's actually a fairly low filament use model, and it utilizes what we call like string art. Of course, it's not going to focus, but this is all bridging. So each little string is a bridge. Of course, not all of them made it on this specific one. They usually do a pretty good job, but I think I lost like one. It didn't fully attach, which is not bad for a print like this. So this is printed in Polymaker's, one of their co-extrusion polyteras, and it looks pretty dang awesome. I'm happy with that. And bless you.
Thank you. I'm muted. Pro streamer. Yeah. So you've been working, and then you've been working on your printer. The other thing that I did this, of course, on Friday. It was Fix 'em Dude's birthday, and we did something unique. Usually there's a model for someone's birthday, but since Fix 'em Dude has so many models,
too many,
including, of course, Millennium Falcons, which I'm printing multiples of for my wall. I did a print that no one has actually posted a make of on printables. This came out the same time as the Pumpkin Pie Fighter, but this is the X Ving. So it's got like pumpkin spice and Halloween coffin. It's like the coolest model. So
I love it.
Get started on your Halloween makes now, or of course, spooky season for some people is year round.
Oh yeah, year round.
This is a really cool model, and we'll link that as well for you. Or just go to printables.com/@fixemdude.
Perfect.
Yeah. So we were talking about, of course, we're going to Murph. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention is this Friday, I am part of a charity stream. We'll link that below, and I've linked people in chat. Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, in support of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. So
that'd be a lot of fun. That's over on Twitch, so make sure to.
That'll be it. Pezliz.
Yeah. If you want to follow these live, you can also follow me at twitch.tv/zombiehedgehog. It's a lot of fun. People are in chat, chatting away, asking questions. So follow both of us on Twitch. But the main topic today is 3D printing and first layers. The tagline is getting your prints to stick. It's not as easy as you might think. Some people They just get their printer unboxed and their first layers work great, and you never have to worry about it. And that's awesome, but most of the time, you gotta do some tweaking and tuning.
Yeah, and there's a lot of factors involved in that, in getting, of course, getting your first layer down and making your prints work. And it's really interesting that we're seeing people with, even with brand new out of the box bamboos that are supposed to be perfect, and they don't
Yeah.
understand that basic principle. So it's really interesting, um, to see those challenges come up with printers like that. So there's a couple different things that you can do to make sure that you have a good even first layer. So we sort of outline them, and we kind of save the best for last, just so you know. So anyone that's watching and they're waiting and waiting and waiting for the, obviously one of the most obvious things, you're going to have to wait.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but
Number
yeah.
7 will shock you. There we go.
Exactly. So the very first thing that you want to make sure is, of course, that your bed is level, and that make sure that your nozzles are the correct distance from the bed, and there's different ways that you can do that. Of course, if you have to manually do that, you got the silly piece of paper thing where you have to go through all the different points. But if you have auto bed leveling and also something like Octoprint, something that you can enable do a bed mesh, that's super helpful. And why is that helpful, Austin?
Well, the first point you mentioned, manual bed leveling. Most printers now should not have manually leveled beds. They'll have some type of bed probe, whether inductive or physical probe, some type of probe. But if you have an older printer, manually leveling your bed can it'll make sure that the difference between the highest spot of the bed and the lowest spot of the bed is enough, so when you do an entire layer on your bed, it should print relatively fine. Now, there is a point where you cannot physically level your bed. If you have a big enough bed, you cannot physically get it. We call it leveling. It's really tramming. It's getting the bed as kind of flat as possible. And that's when the bed mesh takes over using a bed probe. And that'll automatically raise and lower your nozzle depending on the offset from the bed.
Yeah, so tramming is very important.
Very, very important. I personally recommend running a bed mesh for every print, depending on your setup. It can kind of, if you run and store a bed mesh, then you might have issues with, if your gantry is slightly tilted, it might apply the wrong offset, and you might have one size too squished, one size too high. That's very common on printers with dual Z. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and if you're really used to just doing, just turning on your printer and going ahead, you might not notice things like, every once in a while, I'll do a mesh and I'll say, what is that? Why is there such a distance? And there's a tiny little piece of filament underneath my build plate. There could be a screw that's loose if you've, or some problem with your magnet. So it's really helpful to pinpoint even things that you might not realize, for sure. And if you have a warped, and sometimes over time, your plate could be warped too, especially if you've got a metal plate. So
it's really good to visualize that inside of something like Octoprint. So I would strongly recommend getting some way of visualizing your print, some way of having the printer show you what it looks like. So I would look up how to do that for a specific printer or using Octoprint. But what I think is more important than actually leveling your bed is your Z offset or your probe offset, whatever whatever it is for your printer. It's how far the nozzle actually is away from the bed. If your bed is level and your nozzle isn't at the right height, then your prints just aren't going to stick, or you'll have too much squish. So what's a good test to see if your nozzle's too squished?
We are huge fans of the Zee or Zed calibration disc. This is on printables. Some people use a square. I find the disc is super useful because, first of all, it's pretty and fits nice in this, and I use it for my filament samples. But the other thing is, you can, with this one, it goes in a circle, and it also goes forwards and backwards. So if you find that you've got a good enough, if you've got good enough adhesion, you can stop when you're doing the manual Z leveling. You can stop in enough time that you're not wasting any more filament, or like me, you can use it as your filament samples. And I know you can't really see, but this is super smooth. This is smooth,
just,
like a baby's bottom. And then other times, it's not so smooth, and you've got, different.
That's actually a really good disc
yeah.
to clean your bed too. If you have some leftover residue, you just throw one of those over the area with some like way too squished filament, and there's a chance that it'll pull it up.
Yeah.
So
and it's a good way to see, or if you go from a dark color to a light color, or light color to a dark color, a lot of time that gets just enough filament out to get you going. But being able to manually adjust that, especially when you're see, there's some that aren't as pretty as others, to be able to manually adjust that is really helpful to getting your first layer.
Yep, and you'll either do that via manually, like physically twisting knobs in the bottom of your bed if you have a manually leveled printer, or call it baby stepping. That's typically the term, where you go into your actual controller and you bring your Z up and down during a print, and make sure to save that when you're done a print. I'll note that. Don't save their Z offset, and they wonder why they always have to do it.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they take notes. Some people have a little Post-it note or a notebook nearby, or on your phone or your computer, and just sort of keep an eye on that too, because that can help you see if there's any major adjustments. Yeah. A major adjustment that needs to be done, and this is something that a lot of people tend to forget, is keeping things clean and maintained. So you could do a major print on something, and you peel it off the bed, and then you're touching your build plate, you're flexing your print off your build plate, and your hands have been all over it. So
never touch your build plate. Don't do it. Your hands are still oily, and guess what doesn't stick? I think I've said this before, but oils repel filament. You're literally coating your bed in a surface that can't stick to filament. But like pro tip, you should, where if you have a purge line, run your finger over the purge line area, develop a little bit of a layer of oil, so that when you go to pull off your purge line, it comes right off. It's a little bit of a tip if you have oily hands.
If you're big on pulling things off your purge line, people like to do that. And so there's a couple different ways. Obviously, you want to make sure there's no debris on your bed. If you've just done a print and you've pulled it off without really touching it, you can use, of course, isopropyl alcohol. You just do a little spritz, wipe it off with a lint-free cloth, a shop towel, and you're good to go. But if you've touched it way too much, hot soapy water, Dawn Power Wash is excellent. And then when you're handling it, you handle it by the edges, and you want to dry it.
Record player.
Yeah, like a record, not a record player.
Record player. A record. Yes, I like a record.
A record. So and no heating up cookies, no grilling a sandwich on your print bed. Just to keep it nice and clean. That's a huge thing that people don't seem to realize.
Isopropyl alcohol is not cleaning; is spreading around the oils. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to spread it around and, I guess, make it more manageable. But isopropyl is really for debris, from what I've seen. So any type of dust that's accumulated, stuff like that. Not as much for oil. So the only real way of getting oil off is with some type of dish soap.
And the next important thing, of course, is your bed temperature. We are of an era where we've never had to deal with cold beds, at least for most of us, for our printers. But the bed temperature is important, and depending on the printer, the environment where your printer is, the type of filament that you're using, all of those factors come into play. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Don't just assume that more heat is going to mean more stick. You can actually get too much heat on your first layer and cause issues. So I would stick with the manufacturer's recommended suggestion and maybe bump it up 5 to 10 C. So a typical
Mhm.
first layer temp is around 60 to 65, maybe 70 C for PLA, depending on how thick your bed is. But I wouldn't have a set point of more than 65 for a typical printer for PLA.
Yeah.
PTG, you actually want to have a slightly colder first layer than the rest of the layers, specifically for the filament temperature. But you'll have to find what works best for your specific filament, because every single filament is different. And the temperature of the bed is also one factor, but the actual temperature of
Nozzle.
your filament,
Yeah.
that's even more important. People print too cold. Printing at 190C will result in very poor adhesion to your bed. So you always want to have, if possible, your first layer temp be a little bit on the warmer side, around 215 to 220C for PLA seems to be a pretty good sweet spot, and then 5 to 10C lower for the rest of the layers, depending on how fast you print, etc.
Yep.
So,
And using a test disc is another good way to see what temperature you should use for your filament. A lot of people do temp towers and things like that, which are great, especially if you're going to do like a major print. But this is really good to see how the different filaments, whether it's a silk or a polyterra or a polymax, things like that. So that's a really useful way. And if your nozzles, if it's too hot, then you're going to be over extruding, and if it's too cold, then
yep.
yeah, you're going to run into problems too. So that's where you don't want to, and also you don't want to end up with blobs and skipping all over the bed. So that's a big thing. And then of course the next thing that's really important is speed.
Speed.
A lot of people just want to get their print done. They want to get out the door. They want to, they want to have, they want to have their print right away. Speed has become a major factor in 3D printing right now. That becomes like the litmus test for all these things. I know that when I started doing articulated models, so like flexies and things, I didn't realize how much of a factor speed was to printing them properly. Because if you don't have the good, like a really good first 10 layers on those types of prints, where you've got all those different articulations,
Yeah.
if you're printing too fast and you're jumping all over the bed with not enough time for those layers to adhere properly, you're going to end up with a mess. And it's always so sad to see when someone's printing something like that and they've gotten so far, and then all of a sudden it goes and pieces go flying, because of course they lost adhesion, because the nozzle bumped apart. So yeah, speed is a big factor in that.
So for actual speed recommendations, your most important speed is your outer walls. I typically run about 40 millimeters a second, regardless of what size printer it is. For me, that seems to be pretty. Of course, that's conservative, but when we're talking about printing stuff that's, if I print it faster, it might fail. If I print it slow, it has better chances of success, I'll just print it slower. It doesn't add too much time, and it guarantees me that I have better successes. And then for the infill, you can go a little bit faster, but you want to make sure that you're not under extruding. If you go too fast, then now you're under extruding. You're not pressing up against the bottom surface enough, and that might cause issues.
Yeah, and once you're in the safe zone, you can speed it up a bit. Once you feel a little more confident with it, but definitely make sure that you start slow and steady, especially with a big project. You just hate to have all that filament wasted. And that also includes if you're doing a full bed, right?
Speaking of full beds and big projects, what happens when you have everything else perfect, but stuff still just is not working? What do you do?
What do you think?
Well, two things. Number one, you can use what I would call more of a I don't know the good word for it, but unnecessary in most cases, but that is adding a brim or we call them lily pads, Mickey Mouse ears, the little additions to your print that helps increase the surface area where stuff wants to pull up as it shrinks, or however you believe that filament shrinkage works.
And that goes for, especially for larger scale things, like for example a drippy pail. If you don't want it to warp on the bottom, you would have lily pads on the corners. I think in Prusa slicers it's a modifier and it's a disc, but depending, I think Kira also, I think they might call it, I can't remember what it's called, but we are going to link actually a video by Modbot. he has a really good video that's helpful, so that'll be
awesome.
That'll be linked for you. It's the easiest way to explain it, because if someone else has already explained it properly, why not? So
you typically only need those types of helpers on the corners, where there's a sharp edge, where that's just not going to have good contact or enough surface area. But that is kind of, it requires post-processing, so it's not my first recommendation to do that. If you just want a print that comes off the bed looking good, then I do recommend looking into some type of bed adhesive. So have you used any type of bed adhesive, actually?
Have I used any type of bed adhesive? I have used many. Of course, I started out with, I had a glass bed on the Focus when I started out, and everyone always was just absolutely mortified by my print bed because it was covered
glue stick
the entire time. The only way I could get things to stick was covering it in glue stick. So I used the purple Elmer's school glue. I had that all over my bed. When I eventually graduated, still with the Focus, so I did not have auto bed leveling. When I got the Ulti stick, there were times that I still needed help, and that's when I discovered Magigoo. So Magigoo is another and this is, Magigoo is nicer, I find, than glue stick, because it rinses off PLA nicely, so you don't end up with the residue, and the bottom of your prints don't have streaks all over them.
Coating.
So.
Fun fact, a light pro tip: if you have any type of glue residue on your print, you can hit it with the heat gun and it just evaporates. It's a miracle. It's crazy.
But you don't always get rid of, especially if you don't have auto bed leveling, you don't always get rid of the lines that creates. So a textured plate
stuff
is really nice for that too, to have a nice pretty bottom. But you also use other
I've used a few things, just like you. When I had a glass build sheet, I started off with glue stick because that worked the best. Then I switched over to PEI. I had pretty good luck, but then I had some prints that just weren't the best, and what I did was I got some Maker's Mistress. This is from West 3D, and I believe it is about the equivalent of a combination of isopropyl alcohol and glue stick. And what happens is you apply it to the bed, the isopropyl alcohol evaporates, so you wipe it in, the isopropyl alcohol evaporates, and you have this nice thin layer of what's essentially glue stick on your bed, and that works great. A kind of cheap hack, if you want to achieve the same look or performance, is you can take a thin layer of glue stick, also spray on some isopropyl alcohol, and wipe it down with your lint-free cloth. I use these blue shop towels, but that way you can have a thin coating of glue stick. And of course, making sure that if you're using glue stick, make sure that it is a plain glue stick. In fact, the Sliceworks one has worked pretty good. It's just plain glue. It's nothing, no additives, nothing crazy. And it's designed to be used for your print bed.
Yeah, and with something like Magigoo, you can also mix that with water and I think alcohol. And some people have, people have different. People definitely have different.
You'll find it works for you.
Different
and I think the last thing, well, one of the last things, I have not tried this. I just got this in today in my Alien 3D kit. This is Vision Miner Nano Polymer Adhesive. This is what a lot of people swear by. It's a coating that you apply on your bed, similar to this, but this is different. This is very different. from what I understand, and it works very well from what I've heard. So I'm excited to try it out and see how it works. But that could be a solution as more of a, you print a lot and you just need very good adhesion all the time. Maybe look into something like that.
And there's a couple things that we haven't mentioned, and there is a reason, because we are very fortunate enough to have these tools in our arsenal, and we have been told by people who have experience that it's a no-no. So one thing I actually have had to use once, it's because I had a print failing and I was desperate, I really wanted it to work, is painter's tape. And then the other thing that is often recommended is hairspray. I've been told many reasons why not to use it, and so I choose not to.
I would not use an aerosol around your electronics, just personally. No. But if it works for you, you can continue using it. Just be safe. If you're gonna do it, take off your flex plate and then spray it and then reapply. If you're gonna do it correctly.
Spray elsewhere and then apply. That's kind of OG. And then also the painter's tape was used when people did not have heated beds a lot of the time, and that was a good way for them to have their.
Rolohan, the creator of the Rook, actually the BOM spec for the printer is a non-heated bed for cost. So painter's tape actually works really well for PLA. It does, if you have the right, right offset, etc. So you can use it for PLA if you don't have a heated bed, but if you have a heated bed, you don't need painter's tape. There shouldn't be a use case where you need it. So I think that's just about it. So that's been first layers in your printer. Remember, your first layer is your most important layer. Everything builds off of it. So if you don't have it right, you will run into issues. So always make sure your first layer is dialed in first, as well as all the rest of your printer settings. E-steps and flow is very important for having a good first layer as well, depending on your offset. So just double check all of the things we talked about today if you're running into issues. And if you need more support, you can hit us up over on the MakerDeck Discord, where you can ask these questions like, hey, my bed, I can't get it working. What do I do? And people can help you out.
Yeah, definitely. And before you start a major project, before you start a big print, something where you're using, your favorite filament, do these steps. These steps are so important to saving your print, saving your filament, and making something beautiful. And that's what we want you to do, whether it's a Gridfinity or if it's a Flexi Dinosaur, whatever it is, you want to have the best quality print. So
absolutely. And on that note, this has been a lovely episode of the Zee Zed show. My name was Z.
And I am Zed. Check us out Mondays live, 10 p.m. Eastern on twitch.tv/zombiehedgehog. And we tend to upload these and have a live premiere on YouTube as well. So we always have the Zolon there. So hi, Zolon, if you're there. Thank you, everybody. And make sure you leave comments below and let us know what ideas or what questions you might have for future episodes.
Awesome. And you forgot to like, so make sure to do that too.
Yes.
So, bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Merci beaucoup. A bientôt.
See you later.